welcome to History Talks. I'm your host, Will, and this is Sebastian. In this episode, we continue our series on communist revolutions in the 20th century, and we will be doing our third part on the Chinese Communist Revolution. So, Sebastian, and at the end of part 2, we discussed the Sino-Soviet conflict, which was the border conflict between the Soviets and the Chinese.
Yeah.
So let's start from there. What happened after that?
So after that, Mao loses a lot of his ties with Moscow, but eventually that becomes less of a concern for him than something else. Ever since the Great Leap Forward, there have been questions to Mao's reign. No one would dare totally overthrow the great leader, but many of the fanatics that he had appointed in leading up to the Great Leap Forward had started to lose power. People were listening to them less, and other people were rising through the ranks of the various government bureaucracies.
Oh, okay. What kind of people were they listening to instead?
More moderate figures.
Oh, more moderate. Okay, so the people, maybe the party leadership, they were all true believers. He had purged everybody that was not a true believer in his Chinese Marxist ideology. But there were other people rising because maybe the general population was more moderate, and they had a demand for more moderate leaders.
Yeah.
Okay.
And among these is, various moderate figures who actually rise to positions like high even in the party. And Mao is trying to create a plan to revitalize communism in China. It's not as popular as he remembers it. Back in the 20s, the 30s, Mao remembers, all this stuff about, we're going to do all this, and joining the fervent CPC, but...
Right, so he had all sorts of youthful zeal, and he's saying that the youth of China, and what are we talking about, the 1960s now?
And we're finishing off the 1960s.
Oh, so we're even going into the 1970s,
yes.
Essentially. Okay, so 1960s, 1970s, he sees that the youth of China do not have this zeal, they do not have this energy, they're much more moderate, they've seen the extremes. Well, a lot of them, it was the Great Leap Forward, right? Where 45 million people died. So what year was that? That was
58 to 61.
Okay, 58 to 61. So this is the end of the 60s, early 70s. A lot of the people who are now teenagers, for example, or young adults at that time, they experienced that. They lived through it. They probably knew all sorts of people who died. So they might have a really good reason why they're not too enthusiastic about this system.
Yeah. So Mao, in response, begins a program called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. And whereas the Great Leap Forward was bonkers in its economic policies, this is just straight up chaos. During the Cultural Revolution, Mao wanted to revitalize his communist spirit, so through various means. So first, he went down to the schools, though it wasn't in just like, we'll have the teachers teach our state-sponsored curriculum or whatever.
Right.
He did this. Basically, he was promoting a recently published book by Mao and his advisors called The Little Red Book. And this Little Red Book became a symbol of the Cultural Revolution, because it was basically this handbook full of just a whole bunch of different Mao quotes.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can still go read through the Little Red Book.
Okay, it's like the pocket guide to Maoism, huh?
It's mainly just Mao quotes, like things Mao said.
Okay. The great leader, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he promotes this book among the youth, but he also promotes this idea of, oh yeah, if your teacher disagrees with anything the state says, it's your job to hold your teacher accountable by rising up against the teacher. So, he implements this whole idea of, you have the state, and then you have the people, and then you have the state apparatus of the schools, the industries, that the people are supposed to rise against in the name of Mao, the head of the state.
Okay.
As you can tell from just that explanation, it was a little weird, but some of the photos taken around that time show, young people being like, yeah, let's do this or whatever.
Right, and these may have been propaganda photos, so we might have the majority of the population, or do we know? I'm just going to assume a large percentage of the youth, if he's doing this, if there's a need for this propaganda campaign, it's because he knows the youth are not excited about it. And the reason the youth are not excited about it, I'm sure there's lots of reasons, but I imagine one of them is so many people died during the Great Leap Forward, which they experienced in their childhood. I'm just assuming that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
Right? So he's basically essentially trying to create a system of incentives, right? Where basically if you follow all the things that I say in my book, you will be rewarded.
Yeah.
So he's hoping that he can get people. So you may there's obviously going to be opportunists who are going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But you may have a lot of people who just say, this is nonsense.
Yeah. Now, however, he decided to go a step further, to try to drill in this whole ideology. So the most brutal thing of all was probably the massacres.
This is when he turned to political violence.
This is when he really turned to political violence.
We had talked about the Bolsheviks, right?
Yeah.
They engaged in lots of violence, lots of, either you're with us or you die or we send you to the gulags, right?
Yeah.
They had some starvation, but it was mostly just flat out, do what we say or we kill you, right? Mao, up until this point, he hasn't really used political violence, right? There may have been starvation because he was, which sounds like it had more to do with incompetence and this misguided idealism than anything. But at this point, he's basically saying, look, maybe he must be fearing he's losing control, and he's basically saying, I've got to rein control. If people aren't going to do what I tell them, heads are going to have to start rolling.
Yeah. And one thing he uses to initiate these massacres is not just, the police have guns, they shoot, but also he takes advantage of something called, I believe it's called herd behavior.
Yeah.
It's this concept in psychology that you can get a section of a crowd to start doing things, and then people start bandwagoning onto that, and then eventually you just have this massive mob that's not even thinking, they're just following.
They follow like cattle, like stampeding cattle.
Yeah, not even thinking.
Yeah.
And he tries to take advantage of this to try to create this fervor. And this leads into some pretty horrific situations, including at least 5 different massacres. One of which is reported by eyewitnesses to have involved cannibalism.
Yeah.
And it's estimated that by the end of the Cultural Revolution, 20 million people died.
Wow.
Yeah.
And cannibalism was a large part of this in that case.
At least in one of them, massacres.
Okay. So it wasn't just shooting people. Oh, okay, so one of them, cannibalism, was involved, and other ones, it was just shooting
people, getting the crowd to, rip people apart, all the things.
So he was trying. Okay, that was part of it. It was really like he wanted to create stampeding cattle.
Yeah.
Because if you have a bunch of cows out in a pasture and you want to make them run, you just need to startle. You don't need to startle them all. You just need to start maybe one or a few of them. You need to get them running, and they all start running. So it was the same kind of mentality here. It was, hey, we're just going to start shooting people, getting people, corralling people, getting them stampeding like cattle,
Yeah.
And but they had to do 20 million of that. How many people lived in China at this time?
I don't even know.
I mean, after 45 million starving to death a
Yeah.
decade or so earlier, and then killing another 20 million. Yeah. I know they have a massive population now. I mean, what do they have now? Like 1 billion or something?
Like 1.5 billion.
1.5 billion, yeah. So they have a massive population. So I don't know what their population was like, around 1970,
Yeah.
1960. But assuming it was, we don't know what percentage of the population that is. That would be an interesting thing. Maybe I'll put something in the description of the video. But anyway, whatever the number is, it's a very significant number of people. So he goes around just shooting massive amounts of people.
Yeah, just starting these crowds out to it. He's specifically getting these herds of people to target people who might be questioning the mob and questioning the Chinese leadership.
Okay, so that's what he is. He's specifically targeting people that are questioning his leadership.
Yeah.
He's able to get his own military, his own police to fire on their own citizens. It sounds like, right? If they killed 20 million of them. And so how do the people respond to this? Do they conform to his rule, or do they push back more, or what?
This is where the censorship makes it a bit hard to determine the exact reality of the situation.
Okay.
Because obviously China's promoting this image of, oh yeah, everyone's on board, we're rising up against the old capitalist kulaks or whatever.
Right.
And, you do hear eyewitnesses say that, oh yeah, people who got involved in these mobs would often, still carry some of that fervor even after it ended. Mm-hmm. But then all of the eyewitnesses who actually testified seem to be against the Cultural Revolution, to have said that they opposed it.
Okay, where do they testify?
Interviews after the fact.
Okay.
When you interview actual survivors, from what I've observed, it seems to be one of those things where the survivors who were interviewed observed a lot of people turning to communism because of this, but all of these survivors that get interviewed say that they themselves opposed the Cultural Revolution and still do.
Yeah, I mean, normally when a government has to fire on their own citizens, it's because the government is promoting policies that are very unpopular with the citizens, right? Mm-hmm. If the citizens like the policies, you wouldn't have to fire on them. They would just willingly go along with it. So that, alone indicates there was a lot of resistance from the population.
Yeah.
Okay. So what ends up happening? How long does Mao rule?
He rules into 77, and that's a great transition into the question of succession. Okay. Because Mao's got this whole population riled up, and all this stuff is happening. But Mao
what does he die? He's old. He's pretty old by then, right?
Very old. At this point he's picking out a successor.
Okay, so he knows he's at the end of his life. He's picking out a successor. Do we know how old he was when he died?
Let's see. He was born 18 something.
Oh, he was born in the 1800s, so he was
18 or 19 or something.
Okay, that's okay. If you don't know, that's another thing I can also just look that up and put it in the description of the video. But okay, so he's elderly at this point. Yeah. He's looking at a successor. He's struggling during his final years to hold on to power. He's using violence against his own people to try to control them. Mm-hmm. And who does he end up choosing?
So he picks this guy called Lin Bao, I believe his name was. I might be wrong about that, but at first this Lin guy, he's compliant with Maoism. He looks like he's just gonna succeed and coach China through. But then Lin dies in a plane crash, and now Mao doesn't know what to do, because most of the other guys, they don't seem like they could hold China together from Mao's perspective. And there is one guy who does seem like a likely candidate for succession. Deng Xiaoping.
Xiaoping, okay.
Now Deng joined the Communist Party from even before the PRC had united China.
Okay.
And and he became
PRC is the People's Republic of China.
Yeah.
Okay.
He had become a mayor in a minor town and had slowly risen through the ranks of. I believe he was involved in economics.
Okay.
And he had risen through the ranks, and, at one point he may have been excited about Maoism, but after the horrors of the Great Leap Forward, he was just totally done with Maoism.
Interesting.
He pretended to be, all of that because to help.
Because that's what politicians do.
Yeah, to gain rank, but it's pretty clear that by this point he was not as big a fan, especially given what he actually did with that power.
Okay, so there were clear indications. Okay, so he actually used power in a way that was they considered more moderate?
Yeah, like he was trying to reform China to a more market-based system.
Okay, so he was trying to promote more moderate things, but you said yet Mao still favored him, still selected him.
Mao did not favor him.
Oh, Mao did not, okay.
But it looked like
other people did.
Yes.
So Mao was just a true believer till the end. He wanted somebody who was just going to carry on with his original vision all the way to the end. However, say his name again, Xiaoping?
Deng Xiaoping.
Xiaoping, okay, so Xiaoping, he's much more moderate.
Yeah.
Is he who ends up taking power after Mao?
In 1977, Mao dies of old age. And at first there's this other guy who tries to take power. I don't remember his name.
But is that who was selected by Mao?
Yeah.
Okay.
But after, I think it was only 2 years that this guy reigned and he didn't do anything. Or not even 2 years, I think it might have been 1 year. The guy is eventually forced to resign because nobody supports him, and Deng is selected as the new leader of the People's Republic of China.
Okay, so it sounds like the people of China are not a fan of Mao at the end.
Yeah.
At the end of his life. By the end of his life, he's using violence against them. He's murdering people to try to get them to submit to his will. He picks somebody to carry on his legacy, and the people just push this guy out and put somebody else in. So they're done. The Chinese people are done with Maoism at this point. Okay.
And that, roughly speaking, is where communism ends in China. You can still go to China, and they still use hammers and sickles everywhere, and have Mao's face on clocks and stuff.
Really? Huh.
But
they're just a legacy from the past. It's kind of, is it like how we have statues here?
Kind of, but kind of like that. Also, you still see the People's Republic be like, oh yeah, we're totally continuing Mao's legacy. Mao was great.
There's still people who say that.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
But Deng Xiaoping...
we're talking late 1970s now.
Yeah.
Okay.
In 1978, Deng takes power, and he immediately reverses the Great Leap Forward. Okay. He begins a bunch of reforms to reverse its effects.
Okay.
And then he transitions China into more of a mixed economy, where industries are still technically state-owned, but they compete in a free market, especially on the global stage.
Oh, okay.
Trying to combine the parts of Maoism that benefit the government with the parts of capitalism that cause productivity.
Okay, interesting.
And
so that's much more popular among the people.
It's just much more effective.
It's more effective, which being more effective, I would assume if people have a better quality of life because of it, they would be more supportive of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the cities benefit from Dengism a lot more than the countryside, interestingly enough.
Okay.
But yeah, that's basically where Chinese communism ends.
Well, that's where they become so factory oriented, right? How many with exports all around the world.
Because it's this Dengist ideology that transitions us into roughly the China we see today.
Okay.
The second largest economy in the world.
Which is largely based around manufacturing.
Yeah, expanding the manufacturing sector to the point where they can dominate that whole market, trying to expand their influence through both economics and military force. Because whereas Mao had had lost a lot of the support of his party,
Mm-hmm.
Deng's effectiveness meant that at a certain point he stopped even needing the people's support because the party just liked how effective he was.
I see. Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, so he was able to implement these changes very rapidly, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of support behind him. There was a lot of dislike for Mao's policy. A lot of people wanted to have the kind of changes he implemented. And do they still have that sort of system today, the mixed economy?
Yes.
Okay, so still the same sort of thing. America jumped on top of that when they got into manufacturing then, right?
Yeah.
Manufacturing, exports. America jumped on top of that. We all know that a large amount of the consumer products in the United States today come from China.
Yeah.
It's been that way for a few decades.
Mm-hmm.
So they essentially did that. That's interesting though. I
Yeah.
mean, we're going to a different topic here. We're going into a whole different thing. But it's interesting trade wars between the United States and China. You know, as some people in the United States say, oh yeah, let's just keep importing goods from China. Other people say no, we need to end our reliance on them. So, but did you have any other final things you wanted to say about the Chinese Communist Revolution?
I just wanted to note one historical footnote. During the Great Leap Forward, Mao declared that sparrows were one of the great four evils, along with
Sparrows, the bird.
Yes.
Huh. Okay.
And he just.
Oh wait, what were his four great evils?
They were like sparrows, disease, capitalism, and one other thing.
Huh. Okay. Sparrows. So he just didn't like these birds. Okay.
And he tried to kill them, and he failed.
He just tried to kill every sparrow you saw. You were supposed to kill it.
Yeah, and making China the second country in world history to declare war on birds and lose.
Wow. Okay. Who else?
Australia declared war on emus.
On emus. Interesting. What was their?
Emus were just harassing farmers.
Oh, okay. And then what is the same kind of thing in China? Sparrows were harassing farmers, eating the rice or something like that.
As far as Mao was concerned, they were a threat.
They were just from the devil or something. Or he's an atheist. They're just bad.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, great. I think that was a good series on the Chinese Communist Revolution. We're going to do Cuba next, right?
Yeah, Cuba, and then I think we'll finish up with all the others.
Or the Eastern Bloc.
Eastern Bloc is really simple.
Okay. All right. So anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed our episodes on China. And next episode, we'll be continuing our series on the communist revolutions of the 20th century and discussing Cuba. All right. Good job, Bastian.
All right. Yeah, we'll go Cuba, and then.